Hello everyone and welcome to a very exciting video. Today we are needle felting the cutest Easter eggs ever, and this is not an overreaction. With Easter just around the corner now, I thought I'd make some fun, colorful Easter eggs. But with a twist. The twist being fluffy, of course. And if you guessed it, you know me so well. I haven't seen anyone else do this yet, so I thought I'd take the opportunity and give it a shot. I wanted to create unique designs staying on the Easter theme, so I started with sketching out my ideas in a notebook that I've never really done before, but it was honestly really fun to see my ideas slowly coming to life. I might start sketching out my ideas more often, and this also really helped since I couldn't find any references anywhere, so I had to make my own. The elements I thought of when it came to Easter was fluffy, colorful, and earthy, which narrowed it down to these ideas. I sketched out roughly how I would want them to look, but I also specifically wanted all the eggs to be textured in some way. But I was a bit unsure of the how on a few eggs, so I decided I would figure out the how as I created them. As for the other eggs, I had quite a good understanding of what I wanted, though I kept changing my mind on the colors. But before we can have these creations come to life with textures and decorations, we have to felt an egg. Needle felting an egg can be quite difficult sometimes because it's such an awkward little shape, from creating a gradual buildup of wool and all while being perfectly rounded and properly portioned in width and height. So I've made a little method on how to create eggs perfectly every time. So to start, I recommend using core wool. I use it as a base for all of my other felted projects. It's coarse and very easy to felt. Taking a sliver of core wool about 25 centimeters in length, and I start by rolling it tightly with my hands, making sure it doesn't lift off my felting mat, to keep it airtight. As you can see, it's slowly building up in the center as I keep rolling, which is a good step in the right direction. This should end up looking like a bit of a croissant with two very thin loose ends, but instead of folding these ends back and felting them down, I completely ignore them and leave them unfelted and felt the inside as I flip the rolled up wool. And you'd think I'm trying to create an egg shape at this point, but I'm actually just trying to create a cylinder with all the same levels of width and roundedness. I felt the cylinder quite firm, just enough where it will keep its shape if I squish it, and it should feel a little bit bouncy and airy. Moving on to the loose ends of the cylinder that we've previously ignored, I want to now felt these ends down into the inside of the cylinder, and felt in a way of a swirl, starting from the center of the swirl to the outside. It starts to look a bit like a cylinder at this point, but not for long. I continue this process with gradually less felting at the center and more on the outer wall, and you'll find this starts creating a rounded point. Once this is done on both ends, the shape starts to become pill-shaped. And now onto the last step. All I have to do now is roll this into more slivers of wool. Felting the wool as I roll and roll and roll. This adds a gradual growth in the center and to each of the ends. I like to make sure that the slivers of wool I'm using are thin because it's easier to add wool than it is to remove it once it's felted in. When you feel the shape is beginning to look quite oval, it's time to start adding wool to only one side of the egg, since one end needs to be larger than the other. So instead of adding wool in the center of the base, I only start felting wool into one end. I'm not too sure of what to call it, but I'll say just below the equator of the egg when it's standing upright. And this will be the largest part of the egg, and you can make this as round as you want. Once I'm happy with the shape, I use my singular needle to felt down any loose fibers and bumps. And here I have all my Easter eggs I felted with this same technique, and now I can start with the exciting part. The first egg I want to create is what started this idea and my signature design. The texture I want to create for this egg is fluffy, and the process to get this look is very tedious, but very worth it. The wool I'm going to be using is quite stiff and doesn't fall naturally and blend with other layers of wool, which makes it perfect for this fluffy and scruffy look I'm going for. Pulling out a very light strip of wool and using my scissors to cut out inches of wool. Using these pieces, I'm going to layer them throughout the egg with a random felting process, starting at the bottom of the egg. To get this scruffy look, we have to make the wool look random and misplaced, and this will give more texture and dimension to the egg. So to do this, I take the cut inches of wool and felt them through the center in a line, into the base, leaving the cut and frayed ends loose, and then folding them together and looking at where it was felted into the base, I felt down each side to make sure this layer is well secured while leaving the ends up. And doing this now creates a layer. I'll continue to layer pieces like this around the whole egg, but instead of all layers facing one way, I like to do what I like to call the triangle method, where I felt layers down but create a triangle shape within those layers, and continue to do this all the way to the top of the egg. But of course, this can be hard to keep track of sometimes. Within all the layers of wool, it can be easily lost. So I just like to add layers however I feel like it, whether it's straight or diagonal. I've used this method in another one of my projects, which was creating a fluffy narwhal. If you'd like to check that out, I'll have it linked down below. It may also go into better detail than I have now. This is just quite a tricky method to describe, but I'm hoping you seeing it will help. And when the layers of frayed wool starts to build up, I use my scissors and just trim off the excess, which really depends on how thick you want the fluffiness to be. I personally like to make things really fluffy to the point where the item being held, my hand should fall through the fluffiness. I've added time lapses for the creation of each egg to show the full process, but if you'd like to skip ahead to the next egg, I've put in the timestamps of each egg down below. I was really happy with how this fluffy egg turned out, but I can't stop here. We have 4 more eggs to make, and on to our next egg. For this egg, I'm using a pastel green carded wool called Pistachio. It's a really pretty color and it really fits the Easter theme. I've also got this acrylic wool. It's pretty dark green and it fits the moss idea. And I have some wool locks that I believe will really capture the texture I'm going for. To start this piece, I'm covering the base in the carded wool to avoid the core wool color from showing, if I were to miss a spot. This color was really cute, but I ended up not liking it because it didn't look mossy enough. So I ended up felting in some different green colors, but I ended up not liking the look of that either because it looked like a watermelon. I think moss in general is just a quite difficult thing to recreate without adding browns or leaves. I wasn't too sure with where this was going, but I decided to move on and hope for the best. So I started by adding the locks. These locks actually had a really nice gradient of greens to them, which I was hoping would really turn this egg around and capture the earthy forest floor look that I was going for, because I really wasn't feeling great about this egg at this point. Felting them into the base randomly, making sure I keep the curls visible and not too felted. I felted the locks in kind of a spiral around the egg, leaving blank spaces in random areas. So these are actually the first locks I've ever bought. They weren't hand dyed perfectly. They were a bit tangled and hard in some parts, which I'm not sure is a normal thing with hand dyed locks, but it really made me want to dye my own wool. I'd have to do my research on this, but this sounds really fun to do, and I'd definitely love to make a video on it. But do let me know in the comments if anyone has recommendations on where I could get more locks or some cool dye. I wasn't sure of what to add into these blank spaces I've left. I could have added more locks, but I felt like it really needed something more to add a bit of pop, you know? Until I decided some little green spirals would be the perfect characteristic to add to a mossy egg. The way I made the spirals was fairly simple, though I know I made it look quite difficult here. I start by twisting a thin strip of wool and then twisting it into itself. Kind of how things end up twirling into themselves when it's too twisted, but creating a flat spiral with that. I added 4 of these little spirals, all different sizes and different colors, into the blank spaces, and felting a bit more locks in between each spiral to add some more depth. And this ended up being good practice for the next egg. For this egg, I'm using a pastel purple carded wool called Wild Orchid, which is the only wool I'll be using. So to start, I've covered the base in this color, for the same reason of not wanting any core wool to be showing. Once it's fully covered, I've taken a strip of wool and twisted it tightly, and now very professionally spin it around itself. I promise I get better at this and quicker. Since I've planned to have this whole egg be covered in these whimsical little swirls, I've placed the first spiral at the tip top of the egg. felting down the end of the strip into the base so it doesn't move, and then felting in between the spiral, starting from the center all the way down to the end of the spiral. And I do this about 2 to 3 times, going around the spiral, and then I felt the spiral itself, but make sure not to felt too hard or it may lose its depth. I created so many of these little spirals to cover the entirety of the egg. I tried to make these as close in size to each other as possible. Squished and felted these little spirals super close together, almost overlapping. My spiral placement didn't end up to turn out perfectly, but I think I like it more than a uniformed look. For this egg, I'm using pink guarded wool, which I believe was called Blossom, which is perfect for this piece. But I found it was a bit too dark for what I wanted, so I mixed it with a pure white guarded wool to create this pastel pink, which I really loved. And as I've started the past eggs, I covered this egg fully in this lovely pastel pink. When it came around to adding on the flowers, I wanted it to still have depth to it, so with the same idea with the swirly egg, I used small pinches of wool and felted them down directly onto the base, felting the edges of a petal first, almost like a triangle shape, but a bit less structured. But really make sure the flowers have a bit of height to them, and not have them flat looking. To make sure I get this depth, I felt at the sides of each petal to create almost a tall wall. You can also try felting these triangle shapes onto your felting mat first, and then moving them onto your egg and felting them there. I felted flowers wherever I felt happy with, and of course felting in a little yellow spot for the center. When I couldn't fit any more flowers on the base, I still had all this extra space that I wanted to fit in some curls and make it look like it was in a bit of a meadow. I didn't have any pink locks, so I made do with normal wool by twisting it tightly and then felting it down into each spot between the flowers. This egg was my most intriguing idea yet, so I am very excited to tell you how I created this one. I didn't want to create a normal 2D spotted egg like I did in my sketch, so I decided I wanted to make this one fluffy too. You can't go wrong with a fluffy texture, it makes everything look cute. So to start, I wanted this to be a pastel blue, which I didn't have, but I had this gray blue and this off-white, which I mixed together, and I ended up with almost a silvery blue, which I found really pretty. Following the same process I used to create the white fluffy egg, except between layers I'm also going to be felting in random specks of colored wool. I'm using all the pastels I used in the previous eggs, which are the pastel yellow, green, pink, purple, and blue. The inspiration for this egg was actually robin eggs and, of course, confetti, and I really just merged those two ideas together. Because looking at pictures of those robin egg candies, you see that they have a bunch of speckled brown dots, and I decided to make those colorful instead, which I think ended up being quite a cute little idea. After I felted in normal layers, I would randomly pick spots on top of that layer and choose any colors of my liking, and then I would layer regular layers on top of it. Sometimes one layer on top, sometimes 2 layers on top, and then add another random color. I also try to not think too much into it about having 2 of the same color in one area. I just felted where I wanted to, which was really quite fun. And again, when all these felted layers build up, I like to trim off the excess and brush it out. Brushing it out on this egg specifically really helped the colors blend together. And this is how all the eggs turned out. They ended up growing in size, which I expected with the fluffy ones, but not the others. I think my favorite one ended up being the softly sprinkled one, which, can I just say, I love that name. It's so cute. But I would love to know which one ended up being your favorite. I hope you're able to make these in time for Easter and decorate them in your own way. You don't have to use the colors I chose for these. I just really wanted to stick with the pastel theme. Please comment down below. I'd love to know any of your thoughts and any other questions that you may have. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for more. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.